Welcome everybody to this session from the RTPI titled In Conversation With. My name's Abraham Laker. I'm really pleased to be sitting with Judith discussing why we became town planners and what it means to us and what planning is all about. As I said before, my name's Abraham Laker. I'm a qualified planner and chartered member of the RTPI, working with RPS, which is a multidisciplinary planning consultancy. I'm going to introduce my friend Judith. So Judith, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, my name is Judith Onuh. I'm a qualified chartered town planner. I'm working for WSP, a multidisciplinary planning consultancy, much like RPS.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you quite a very big question, which is sort of defines your career. Is tell me about what you do as a planner on a day-to-day basis, and just give me a brief summary of your role, your job, and the various sort of facets of planning that you deal with on a regular basis.
So what I love about planning is it's a varied role. I can do anything depending on the day and what project I'm working on. So working for WSP, we get a chance to work on a wide range of projects. So at the moment I'm working on a DCO, which is a nationally significant infrastructure project. My role on that is to bring it through the DCO process, so under the Planning Act 2008. So that's generally about a 2-year process. We take it through pre-application, draw up the proposals, submit it to the planning inspectorate, and then you have the examining inspector who's been appointed by the Secretary of State for whatever division that you're seeking permission. In this instance, it's energy, so the Secretary of State of Energy will then examine the inspector's report and decide whether or not to grant approval. So that's just one side of my role. I could either be working on a housing scheme, so that involves a lot more community participation, engaging with local stakeholders, local members of the council to discuss the proposals, what exactly the process is going to mean for that locality, and take it through that process under the TCPA regime. What about yourself? Tell me a little bit about your role and what projects you work on.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, sort of the multitude of what planning sort of taps into is so varied, as you mentioned. A large DCO down to sort of housing schemes. It's it's a very varied platform that planning's involved. I mean, for me, it's mainly on the sort of residential side and mixed use schemes, and that ranges from anything small to sort of a basement extension or a conservatory extension to large sorts of housing developments or strategic land development. So planning does obviously play a massive part on everyone's day-to-day life, and sort of understanding that is sort of one part of my role which I really enjoy is the varied sort of scope of work that you work on. With your DCO, you did what were the sort of key sort of issues you dealt with, and how did you sort of go about getting the right outcome?
I think it's quite a larger question, but the key issues generally tend to be environmental factors and making sure that there's a case for that development. It's not just a case of developers coming up and saying we want to build a nuclear power station, for example. Is there a need for that nuclear power station? Can you justify that need? Can you provide robust evidence to support your case? And you also need to be able to identify early on what the key challenges are going to be. So for example, if you know that transport or environmental issues are going to be an issue, then you make sure that you've got the right consultant team on there. You're engaging early with stakeholders. They're seeing the proposals early to be able to give you, solid feedback, which you can then implement back into your scheme. And hopefully that way you'll be able to mitigate, not all, because you can never 100% mitigate a scheme, but mitigate as best as you can the likely impacts.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, getting obviously the right people involved, the right consultants, but for me as well, most importantly, as you just said, is really engaging with the key stakeholders, which a lot of the time will be, in my case, existing residents or the general public or local surrounding area. So really getting their feedback and understanding what works for them, sort of the issues they're facing on a daily basis, and how planning can be used to shape their their lives going forward for the better is really important. I mean, that's something I really enjoy. Part of my role is just sort of, you meet people from all walks of lives with various different kinds of needs and interests. And whilst I do find planning is affects everyone, it's very hard to strike that balance where everyone can be catered for. But planning is there to balance the social aspects, the economic, the environmental, and also the built environment itself. So again, it's a very interesting world to work in, let's say.
Absolutely. And I feel like sometimes just engaging with members of the public, they're already skeptical in the way of the planning system. And I feel like that's part of our job, to make them comfortable and to know that, the process isn't as daunting as they might necessarily think, and how they can actually get involved in the proposals and provide their comments and enact the change that they want. Obviously, as a planner, like you said, you have to balance that, but every now and then some knowledge comes out from the community that you won't necessarily be privy to. Definitely. That can really help your scheme, be better. So that, for me, that's another part of the role that I really enjoy.
Brilliant. I'm just going to move on to another question, which is, why did you choose planning? Which is, I've been asked this question so many times, and I think for me personally, as I've gotten older, I think why I chose planning keeps shifting and changing. So I'll let you answer first, and then I'll answer afterwards.
Well, I didn't really choose planning. Planning chose me, I would say. Okay. It was during A-level times. I knew I wanted to go to university. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to study. And I went to our careers advisor at the time. My college had a really good careers advisory team. And I sat there for a couple of hours just going through all the subjects I loved and why I loved them. So I really enjoyed geography, human geography, really enjoyed sociology, loved architecture. And he just said to me, have you thought about planning? And immediately I went, I don't want to do events planning. Like, that's not what I want to do. And he was like, no, town planning. And I was like, oh no, I've never heard of that before. What is that? So I read up a little bit about it, and then he encouraged me to go on open days to the universities. So I went on a couple, spoke to some lecturers, and the more and more I learnt about it, the more and more interested in it I became. So that's how I got into planning, and it is definitely the right career for me. So yeah, I'm very lucky in that regard. What about yourself?
For me, it was slightly similar to how you got into planning, but I didn't have, say, as much support from our careers team, because our careers advisors are very traditional in terms of what kind of roles we're supposed to go into, through the sort of university pathway. It was either, accountancy or, law or things like that. So, I similar to yourself, I really enjoyed sociology. I really enjoyed sort of design technology. We never had architecture at our school at that time, so we never had the benefit of that. But for me, it was just mainly speaking to my DT teacher, and he said, look, town planning, urban design, that kind of style. And so I did a lot more reading about it. I wasn't lucky enough to go on any open days, but I did get to speak to someone at the RTPI, just to understand a bit more about, who are you in terms of the institute, but also what is planning. And also I thought, I'd get the first-hand experience directly from the Royal Town Planning Institute. I thought that's the best place to go. Learn a lot more about it, read so many issues about the guidance papers they kept bringing out, from environment to the built form to human geography to the the economic side of things, and it just got really fascinating and interesting. But also I wanted to sort of see what kind of change I can make in the world to an extent, and I think planning is one of those subjects that affects everyone, as you said before. So whatever level you're involved in, it's going to have a massive effect on someone's life. And you can even see from the current affairs, the news and so on, things like the housing crisis, building on greenbelt land, air pollution, all these various things happening in the world, all really do come back to town planning on a much wider scale. So, for me, it was like, if I can get into town planning, enjoy the work I do, but also get to the point where I can have some kind of impact through some of the schemes that, say, developers that I work with or housing associations that I work with, and sort of shape those developments to fit the needs and benefit people who may not sort of have sort of the best starts in life, in terms of both quality of life or so on. then that would be sort of the kind of work I wanted to do. And it just, yeah, planning sort of fit me as well. And also, I like arguing a little bit. I like arguing with people when it comes to determining applications, because I like to argue when I've got a deck stacked in my favour. So going to planning committees and arguing with councillors about why this development is beneficial is, I really enjoy that. And again, I also enjoy speaking with the general public, because, as you said, their knowledge is invaluable. They live in these environments on a day-to-day basis. So understanding what they need and how your development can shape that and benefit their life is
and amazing. I think also, as well as the technical knowledge, there's a lot of soft skills that you need in planning. You need to be able to read 100%. People. You need to be able to communicate well. You need to be able to convey arguments to a wide range of people, but understand how to pitch it. So while there's the technical skills that you require, there's a lot of soft skills as well that you require and you can develop as well in the role.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I've had so many examples where we've held either public consultations or we've gone in to speak to, for pre-app meetings with various councils and also the GLA. And there's so many ways to play it. You don't go in there and bulldoze and beat the planners down and say, we need you to do this and you're going to prove this. The same with the general public. You don't go in there and tell them what's happening. It's a conversation. Exactly. And a lot of the time from these sorts of encounters with the general public and also case officers, it's just the conversation that needs to happen. There should be not a lot of emotion should be taken into it. It's just, let's see how we can move towards a beneficial, balanced standpoint for everyone, so we can see, everyone can sort of benefit and gain from, what's being brought to the table. I totally agree.
And I think as well, when you have those discussions, generally everyone's concerned about the same thing, but they're coming at it from different angles.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just being able to identify that really quickly. What are the main issues here? And how can we come to a resolution? You're not going to be 100% happy all the time, but you give some here, you get some somewhere else.
Exactly.
So just trying to get everyone to understand that as well,
definitely.
Which is also really important.
Brilliant. Just got another question I want to ask is, what has been your career highlight?
Career highlight? I think for me,
I guarantee from the look on your face, there's a lot of them. So.
Well, I was really pleased when I got my chartership. That was 2 years ago. That was a really big highlight, because you work so hard for it. And when you're a graduate, you really, that's the thing you hear about in final year in university, and you're getting into a graduate role and everyone talks about the APC. And to be honest, I didn't really understand the process as a graduate. I was a bit like, when I first got into it, but at the end of it, and you look back, you just see so much growth in yourself and the different projects that you've worked on, the different opportunities that you've had. So that for me is a career highlight. And I'd say another one was working with planning inspectors early on in my career. My first role was at the planning inspectorate, and just having inspectors next to you, just having a chat over a cup of coffee, but the knowledge that they hold, and they were more than happy to share that with all the graduates. So I just felt very lucky to be able to be in a room with those inspectors and just suck their knowledge literally from them, and get their advice on planning and career. It was just fantastic. So those are my two highlights. What about yourself? I'm sure you've got many.
For me, firstly, you've taken one of the main ones I want to say was sort of getting my letters. I mean, from obviously, well, I said before, doing my research into the RTPI and what planning is, and then understanding that, being chartered is the gold standard, and that knows you sort of arrived on sort of the planning scene and you're recognized from your peers in an industry. That was a major thing for me, is, getting my letters. The APC process, yes, I totally agree. It's a difficult process, but then again, I look back at my logbook actually recently, and I look back at what I was first doing in my logbook to what I'm sort of doing now, and I was like, God, I've come a very long way in planning, from just taking notes in a meeting to leading a, pre-app, what do you call it, a meeting with the heads of, the GLA and whatnot in terms of planning and things like that. So understanding that and seeing the growth and all the various projects along the line that have led to that growth, that's been a big achievement for me. One of my other biggest achievements was undertaking the first residence ballot for one of my step generation schemes, and that was the mayor bringing out the estate regeneration guidance, and it was the first time where residents had a full-on say in terms of if they wanted the development to go ahead. So they had to take a residents' ballot. You had to get a majority vote for then obviously to progress to putting in a formal planning application and so on. So doing that as one of the first schemes, along with the various other, the design team and the client involved, was a big achievement, because there was no one's done it before. So you had to really be careful that every step you were taking was going to be sort of best practice in an environment which had no best practice before you. So everything we did was very scrutinized. I mean, and also a lot of it comes down to stakeholder engagement. So if that was done correctly, then the outcome should be a yes for development. If it's done badly, then back to the drawing board to figure it out. So getting that through, getting that passed, and having the client but also the GLA say that this is a very good example of how to undertake the residence ballot. So myself and the rest of the design team were very happy in doing that. Another highlight was just sort of now moving more into understanding. Well, when I first started, was really working directly with developers now and understanding how they view planning, which is a lot more commercial than, say, from working with in sort of like with housing associations and so on. And so one of my highlights was actually working with developers quite early on in my career. So then taking that knowledge through to understanding, when I sit down and look at particular schemes or developments or land to be developed, I'm always seeing both sides of this, the picture, and I'm really trying to add the commercial element to it, because for me, it's it has to be viable and has to be implementable. Otherwise, we're building castles in the sky all the time by saying, oh yeah, we could build 1,000 houses in on this piece of land. Actually, you can only build 2. So a lot of highlights, just sort of having those opportunities to, as you said before, with the planning inspectorate, to tap into wealths of knowledge. And again, I still class myself as quite a young planner, if I can still get away with that term. So learning from sort of the older members who've come before me, who've seen planning from right from the beginning, but the various changes throughout the decades to where we are now, and drawing on that information is sort of a big highlight for me, because then it helps me move forward and understand the ever-changing needs of some of my clients and people I deal with. Let me see. One last question I think there is what has being a planner taught you? Because you mentioned the soft skills earlier, but is there anything else you want to sort of adapt on in terms of separate from maybe the soft skills, but something that's taught you?
Being a planner has taught me that you always have to be flexible in your approach, because if you're rigid and you get a scheme in and you're rigid in how you're going to get to the end, this isn't a career for you. You have to be able to pivot quickly and think on your feet to be able to get to your end goal, because there's so many things that can get thrown at you along the way that you have to be able to respond to quickly, and digest a lot of information and just come to a sound conclusion. So flexibility definitely is one. And the second one is that people are people wherever you go, and they generally all tend to have the same concerns. Like I said, even though they're coming at it from different angles, if you understand people, you understand, what their main concerns is and how you can address that. It's very important, I feel, as a planner, to be able to read people, because it just makes your job that little bit easier, where you can already kind of foresee questions that will come up or key issues that will come up. If you're able to address them early on, and talk to people about it and let them know that you're not just here to dictate to them what should happen in their community, you're here to also listen. At the end of the day, depending on where you're working, you're not going to live there, are you? So the attachment they have to that place is going to be different to what you have. So as a planner, you need to let them know that A, I understand, and B, I care, and C, I want you to help me understand what your locality is about, so I can do the best job that I can do for you. Those are the two things I'd say that planning has taught me. What about yourself?
For me, early on was because when I started my career, planning was this really big, wide subject that touched every corner of people's lives. So having that sort of lateral thinking and understanding, if I get a question asked by someone here, you can answer the question, but then also you can go a step further and say, like, answer further questions, but also show them how it fits into the wider planning system and how these various knock-on effects. So I think just having that lateral thinking, especially when I deal with some very challenging clients. So, they ask you one question, but from that one question, there's another string of a dozen questions that come after that. So being able to understand what that one question is, and then obviously provide information and answers to a list of other questions that they may not have asked before or asked yet, but you've already got the answer to, is something that I've really sort of taken on board. You mentioned pivoting. Yes, 100%. You have to pivot very quickly, because a lot of questions come at you from left field, and a lot of our clients, they are very commercially minded, so they're working very quickly to see how they can make this work. A very tight time frame, a tight budget, so you need to be very clear for understanding, what their needs are. And I think another thing that planning has really taught me, and has just been, once you get your RTPI letters, like your chartership, you are an expert technically in your field. So you need to be able to have the answers to a lot of these queries and questions. So, always reading up and evolving with sort of the world around you, and keeping yourself abreast of what's coming out of Parliament, what's coming out of legislation in terms of planning. Now we've got the white paper that's come out, and everyone's putting in their 2 cents and seeing how this is it going to be worthwhile, are these changes going to be sustainable, so on. It's just really keeping abreast of issues like that, because what I found is certain legislations have changed over time, and some of my clients, maybe 2 years ago couldn't do the developments they're looking to do, but now due to shifts in legislation, shifts in people's views and approaches to certain developments, it is now allowed for these developments to come forward. So always keeping abreast of current affairs and current planning issues has sort of kept me in good stead of understanding the wider picture, and also being able to give a good planning service and that sort of gold standard service to my clients. But one more question to ask you is just, what has been the most challenging thing you faced in planning?
I think it was when I started my first graduate job. I think within the first couple of weeks, I quickly learned that what you were taught at uni, while great, doesn't really provide you with the skills that you need to be a planner. And it was just trying to rationalize that in my head, like, okay, so I know all of this theory, but how do I put it into practice? How do I move forward in this career? And I think that was the steepest learning curve for me, just trying to get to grips with the different legislations at local level and national level, and how does that all work together. And at uni, they teach you about the economy of planning, the environmental aspect, the social aspect. Nobody ever mentions the political aspect. But trying to understand how does that all link into the bigger picture, like you said. And so for me, that was the biggest challenge, was trying to understand, right, this is my role right now, because as a planner, your role differs depending on what sector you work in. This is my role right now. This is the skills I need to get, and this is how I need to go about it. So it was just, I'd say, finding your feet was the biggest challenge, because I feel like there's so much to know. And even now, 6 years in, I still don't know it all. There's still so much for me to learn. So just always trying to learn and do the best that you can wherever you are.
I totally agree.
What's been the biggest challenges, I'd say, for you?
For me, it was just, again, it's very similar to what you said. It's just sort of understanding, when I got queries in from people or questions, is where are they coming from in terms of the planning system, in terms of where does that question fit in terms of the overall sort of, let's say, planning application system or planning system in general. So, is it a question of, we want to go, I'm asking a question because I've got a site and I need some feasibility work, or is it, I've got a site, I've got permission going through at the moment, I need your advice on responding to residents' complaints or objections, or I'm looking at a particular land assembly of strategic level.
Yeah.
Should we go forward with a call for site, so on? So it's always just sort of in my head understanding where to compartmentalize their queries in relation to the overall planning process. And then once I started doing that, and it took a long time, because as you said, there's so much to learn. You, from uni to, you know, professional career, you're still in that sort of dead space where you're not sure how things work. But when you have that sort of Einstein moment of when you go, okay, fine, this question is about a pre-app, you need a pre-app, this is what we need to do, then you know the next steps on from that are very straightforward. Or you can go forwards or backwards. So it's very straightforward. I think that was one of my biggest challenges, was just understanding that. And once that all clicked into place, then everything sort of became a lot more easier, because you can sort of break down the sort of planning query into smaller chunks, and it makes it a lot easier to deal with. One other challenge was my first sort of inquiry. So with the inspector sort of public inquiry, that was tough. That was a whole new landscape, and how to address the inspector and the various QCs that were there, and sort of sitting there as sort of one of the youngest planners in the room, and everyone has been there, and it felt like everyone knew each other, and I was just sort of trying to defend my client's side. It was it was very interesting. I learned a lot from it, and hopefully I'll be looking to do a lot more sort of, you know, inquiry work or local plan reviews and so on. So yeah, I think that is sort of all my questions. So thank you very much for, you know, allowing me to interview the session, and
Thank you for having me.
speak very soon.
Really, really great.
Thank you very much.